Good evening, everyone. A warm welcome to our parent education event on youth substance abuse. Thank you for coming along for what we believe will be an engaging and informative seminar. Before we begin, I want to draw your attention to the details on the screen. Holliston Cable Access TV is broadcasting this event live via the channels on the screen and via a live Facebook stream on its Holliston Cable Access page. I posted these details on social media this afternoon, but if you'd like to take a moment now to send them to anyone who couldn't be here this evening, please do so before we silence our phones for the presentation. The live recording will also be made available after this evening, and I'll post further details on the Holliston network sites when we have it. If you've registered your details at the sign-in desk, I'll send those to you directly in due course. As you know, Parent Education runs an extensive programme of events throughout the year. This is made possible by your membership subscriptions. Membership runs for a school year, so if you haven't already renewed your membership for this school year, please remember to go to hollistonpto.org and sign up for $20. Those membership fees make it possible for us to run these events free of charge. Tonight, we are fortunate to have the sponsorship and support of HDAAC, the Holliston Drug and Alcohol Awareness Coalition, who have funded this event and made it possible for us to bring you an excellent speaker on a critical issue, youth substance abuse. We welcome our guest speaker, Dr. Ruth Potee, an expert in this field. Thank you for being here, and we look forward to your presentation coming up very soon. I'd also like to give a big thank you to HDAAC for their support in our programming, and to Gina Stuckey in particular, who has worked with me on creating promotional materials and spreading the word, as well as providing a board member, Katie Sugarman, who will be joining us on the panel for questions later, and a front desk support team. Thank you, Gina. I'd also like to thank Holliston Police Department for their support with this event. We have 3 members of Holliston Police for our panel session later, and we welcome their contributions and their expertise. Holliston PTO is granting $250 to Holliston Police Department to use as they see fit in their continued work with drugs and alcohol crime prevention. I'll now explain the format we'll follow this evening. In a moment, I'll hand over to Dr. Jackson for some opening remarks on youth substance abuse from his perspective as Superintendent of Holliston Public Schools. Then he'll hand over to Dr. Ruth Potee, who will present to us on the physiology and addiction of the developing brain. After the presentation, we'll take a moment to introduce you to each panel member before we open up to a question and answer session. Please feel free to ask any questions. We'll do our best to answer them fully and address any concerns that you may have. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Dr. Jackson. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. I just want to set a few, provide you a little bit of information from Holliston's perspective. Every 2 years, the Holliston Public Schools at the middle and high school level, along with every school in Metro West and most high schools and middle schools in Massachusetts, conducts what's called a Youth Risk Behavior Survey. And in that survey, we ask students for their frank assessment of what they are doing behind closed doors, if you will. And we have been following this data since 2006. We get information, and all of the results are posted on our website, but I took out some specific information that I wanted to share with you today around the general topic of substance abuse. On the left-hand side are various substances that are subject to abuse by our students: cigarettes, alcohol, marijuana, inhalants, etc. The first numerical column is the percent of students from Holliston High School who in 2006 reported that they had used that during their lifetime. So in other words, in 2006, 37% of the Holliston High School students reported that they had used cigarettes. In 2006, 69% of our high school students reported that they had used alcohol over the course of their lifetime. That is, and the only exclusion to that is for religious purposes, etc., for marijuana inhalants. The next column, the next 4 columns are actually 2016 data, which is our most recent data. And you can see that in every major category, we have seen a significant reduction in lifetime use from our students in every area surveyed. Cigarettes, down from 37% to 12%. Alcohol, down from 69% to 48%, etc. Marijuana, down by 10%. Inhalants, down. Ecstasy, cocaine, prescription drugs. That's the abuse or misuse of prescription drugs, not the legal or prescribed use of prescription drugs. So that second column is Holliston High School numbers. The column that says Metro West, those are communities in the Metro West area. They are high school students. So in every case, Holliston is lower than the aggregation of the Metro West high schools. The next column is Massachusetts high schools. And the final column is the United States. The Youth Risk Behavior Survey is a survey put out by the National Institutes for Health out of Atlanta, and is basically a baseline that schools use across the nation. So the good news is that lifetime usage is down. It's not where it should be. It's not where we want it. The good news is that it's down. So that's the good news. The news that worries me and that I ask you to consider as you listen to this presentation is that, in my view, as a society, we are giving our children a significant mixed message. We have legalized the use of marijuana in this state. We have legalized the use of dispensaries and where people can access marijuana freely. We have also basically opened up this new concept called vaping and have provided our children with little, if no, direction as to its dangers or its potential impact in terms of addiction, etc. In many cases, people who choose to vape have very little idea of what actually is contained in the material they're inhaling. So those are causes for concern for me, and things that concern me greatly as we work to continue to fight to bring these numbers down farther. And I ask you to consider them as you consider the presentation that will follow. So with that in mind, I am proud and pleased to turn this podium over to Dr. Ruth Potee for her presentation. Thank you. And I almost killed myself. Careful.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. It's actually a lovely auditorium, and there's a lot of people in here. You know what I have in the room that makes me incredibly excited? I have students in this room. So thank you for you students that are in this room, because I don't often or always have students. And this really isn't intended for actually everybody in the room, including people who are 11 years old and 17 years old and older than that. So there's nothing that's going to go over anybody's head, to be honest with you. I dive in on some I think pretty critical issues. This slide deck is available to anybody who wants it. And Anne, if you don't know this woman who just introduced me, I've never been introduced by such a lovely British accent, but Anne is a super organizer. You guys may have known that about her already, but she is unbelievably organized. So she has my slide deck, and anybody who wants it, Anne can send around an email list, or anybody who has it, who wants it, can have it. You can go give this talk tomorrow. How am I on sound? Am I cutting in and out a little bit, or am I okay? In the back, are you good on sound? Yeah? Okay, good. Okay, so we're going to talk about the brain. We're going to talk about this amazing organ. I think actually the most important organ in our body is our brain, and it's quite spectacular. And this was an article in September of 2017, i.e. 2 months ago, it's National Geographic, called The Physiology of Addiction. Did anybody read that National Geographic? It's great. I don't know who gets the National Geographic anymore. Didn't we all grow up with National Geographic in our houses, right? So we just renewed our subscription, and it remains an amazing magazine. So this is an article that you could Google because it's all online with really good videos that talks about exactly how the brain breaks down with addiction. And the point of this slide for me is to let you know it's complicated how it breaks. I'm going to explain to you a relatively simple story that's easy to understand, but we're going to recognize that it's even going to be more complicated than the way I describe it. So the brain, the part of the brain that is impacted by addiction, is called the reward circuit of the brain. It's the most elemental, ancient part of the brain, and it's the part of the brain that tells you to live or die. It tells you to survive. It tells you every day to get out of bed, find food, find water, and to send your genetic material forward. Because none of us think of our lives in this fashion, but that is the purpose of us on this planet. It is to live long enough that you could have young, further generations that can populate the planet. That is what your deep internal lizard brain is telling you to do. Now, what did we do this morning? We got up, we got showered, we made coffee, we walked the dog, we went to work, right? Nobody thinks of themselves in this way. But I can tell you, in the most ancient part of the brain that really drives you, it is this every day. It is your survival instinct to send genetic material forward to support your young. So every mammal on the planet has this part of the brain. And the hard part of the disease of addiction is it impacts this reward circuit. If I could pick up the disease of addiction and scoot it out of this deepest elemental part of the brain and have it affect your auditory hearing, and all you did when you got addicted to something is you lost your high-pitched hearing, right? I wouldn't have so many troubles, and neither would you, right? If you lost your peripheral vision when you got addicted to alcohol, I would tell you you couldn't pitch from the pitching mound and you wouldn't get to drive at night, right? It would be easy to fix. But the part of the brain that tells you you should live or die today, that's the part that breaks with addiction. And it is one of the reasons why the disease of addiction is so challenging to treat. And it's the reason we spend time trying to work on prevention, what your superintendent was talking about. So the chemical that is racing through this reward circuit of the brain is called dopamine. Everybody knows about dopamine. You've all heard about it. It gives you this incredible sense of joy, of euphoria, and it gives you the feedback of, holy smokes, that was awesome, repeat the behavior. That's what that part of the brain does. So when you are out living in Holliston 200 years ago, just imagine yourself for a minute 200 years ago. Life was hard 200 years ago. It's going to be 19 degrees this weekend. 200 years ago, 19 degrees was incredibly cold. You sure as heck better have cut enough wood. You sure as heck have better put some salted meat away. You hope that your fatted calf made it through, an illness this summer, because that is how you're going to keep your clan alive. This is not that far in our past, right? But when you're out hunting in the woods and you've shot your 5-point buck, you get a spike in dopamine because your brain says that was positive behavior. You're going to keep your family alive for another 5 days. This is all good. And then it goes back to normal. That's the way the brain works. So dopamine has with it associated this very strong sense of joy, euphoria, and this is good behavior, repeat again. It has with it associated two specific behaviors, compulsion and perseveration. And I want to acknowledge that your ancestors in this room were both compulsive and they were perseverators, and it's the reason you exist, right? You needed to go to bed every night and think to yourself, how am I going to wake up in the morning and take care of my family? How am I going to do it? Where am I going to find the food and water to keep people alive? So it's this cycle in the brain focused on survival. The problem is, so who in this room works in medicine? I know I have medical people in my corner over here. Where do you work? Radiology, okay. So other people in medicine in the room, nurses, ER nurses, okay. Where do you guys work? Or what do you do? You're a nurse? Nurse too, okay. Nurse, awesome. So what you guys bump into, and what my good ICU nurse over here to the right bumps into, is you run into people who struggle with addiction who you see all the time. And you look at this person who you've seen 4 times in the ER for their alcohol use disorder, and you get really frustrated because you're mad at them, and you think to yourself, dude, seriously, you cannot be walking in here drunk every other week asking for help. What is wrong with you? Because that is that frustrated part of our brain. But if you could step back and remind yourself about compulsive and perseverating behavior, they help define addiction. Again, very helpful when it comes to surviving, not helpful behaviors when it comes to addiction, yet it helps define what addiction is. So I make an argument that at a baseline, we have a certain amount of dopamine in our brain, and some of us are really lucky, and we have higher than average dopamine. So on an average, maybe we have about 100 units of dopamine in our brain, and some of us are the golden retrievers of the world. Everything is glass half full. There's a cloud as every silver lining, and maybe your dopamine's 105 or 110, and that's just lucky or genetic or epigenetic. It's a lot of different things. And there's a lot of us who live in more of a dysthymic world that I sort of think of the Eeyores of the world. And I'm not talking about those of us who struggle with depression, but we know these people too. I have people like this in my family who are just low energy, low dopamine. It takes a lot to make them feel better. They have to work a lot harder to feel spikes of joy. And maybe their baseline dopamine is 85, right? Again, you get what you get. You can ask yourself sort of where you fit on the spectrum. So the argument that I make is if we're all sitting at about 100 units of dopamine, and you go out on that November cold day, and you're able to kill a 5-point buck, and you're pumped about that because your family stays alive, you get a spike in dopamine. It goes to 150, and then it goes back to normal again. You have sex, it's consensual, your dopamine goes to 200, and it goes back to normal again, because these are behaviors associated with survival. This is how the reward circuit works in your brain. When you use a drug like cocaine, your dopamine will spike to about 350. When you use a drug like a strong prescription opiate or heroin or fentanyl or whatever is available on the street, your dopamine is going to spike between 500 and 900. And when you use a drug like crystal methamphetamine, your dopamine will spike to about 1,300. So what's amazing is that more people don't wake up every day and decide they're going to do crystal meth, right? Because I am describing something that is that rewarding, that feels that good, right? Like you would think it would be a more common behavior. And we're going to talk about what exactly happens to the brain that actually makes this a negative feedback loop so that more people don't do this. So let's talk about how some of the drugs work. I'm not going to go through every drug, but every addictive behavior, every addictive substance at the end of the day ends up deep in the reward circuit, impacting dopamine. I'm going to talk about 2 drugs because they're fast and easy to understand. There's 3 things in the equation affecting dopamine. How much dopamine is produced, how many neurotransmitter receptors are on the other end of the synaptic cleft receiving the data, and how many little vacuums are sucking dopamine out of the active part of the brain. So 3 things in the equation. The way cocaine works is it turns off the vacuum. So I have no vacuum sucking out the dopamine. That's how I get to 350. It's the easiest to understand mechanism of action. The way the opiates work is more difficult or complicated because it goes through a negative feedback loop through the mu opiate receptor. It turns off the GABA receptor. At the end of the day, it pumps out more dopamine. So I described 2 of the 3 places in an equation where dopamine will be impacted. But people, if we walked through 20 years from now and we're able to understand video game addiction, or some of our kids who appear to be addicted to their iPhones, right? Anybody have a kid who has a glow device in their hand that they can't release, right? So someday we're going to really understand the 14 paths it takes to get to where the dopamine gets impacted with the devices that a lot of our kids are struggling with. So this is the way it works in the brain. When your brain has been used to, for 200,000 years that we have walked on the planet in this human form, when your brain is used to seeing levels of 150 or 200, and it starts to see dopamine spikes of 350, 500, 1,300, your brain's response to that is to say, oh my God, there's something wrong. The volume is too loud. I need to down-regulate. I need to turn down the volume. So the brain's response to seeing these huge spikes in dopamine is to erase dopamine receptors. It gets rid of 80% of the receptors. It stops making dopamine, so you're just not pumping anything out. And it turns on every vacuum in sight, so you're sucking dopamine out of the synaptic cleft. So when you struggle with addiction, you wake up in the morning, and your new dopamine is in 110. It may never have been 110 to begin with. It's not even 85, right, where it used to be. You wake up in the morning and your new dopamine level is about a 40. It is hard to get out of bed. It's hard to be nice to any human being on the planet. It is hard to pour your kid a bowl of cereal. It is hard not to call my office and swear at my front office staff. You are not in keeping with a human being that is trying to stay alive. And the only way you know to feel normal again is to continue the drug, the substance, the behavior. It is the only thing that gives you enough dopamine to make you function. These people who struggle with addiction, they're not getting to a 1,300, a 900, a 500. Those days are so long past. They are desperately trying to chase normal, right? If they got themselves to an 85 that day, that's a good day. It is the reason why addiction is so hard to treat, is because it damages this very critical survival part of the brain. So I think of this concept of the broken brain, and we could talk about any disease in the body and the disruption to the transmitters, the chemical transmitters between organs. They look a lot like this, whether it's hypertension, diabetes, any of the endocrine disorders, they all look this way. And the reason I do this work is the following, because this story that I'm telling you is something that unfolded likely today or yesterday, and it unfolded at Metro West Hospital. And it's not that I'm going after Framingham. It's because this is a story that unfolds in every emergency room in our state, in every emergency room in our country. So this guy that you're seeing in that top left, he actually lives here in Holliston. He's 68 years old. He's having crushing substernal chest pain, and his wife looks at him and says, "Honey, you don't look so good." And he says, "No, it's okay, it's just some indigestion." But he's gray and he's blue around the lips, and she starts to get anxious, and she calls 911. So the first people in the living room are probably Holliston police, because they're probably going to be the fastest. But EMS arrives, they take a look at him and think, holy smokes, this guy looks really sick, right? And they give him some oxygen and sublingual nitroglycerin and an aspirin and a beta blocker, and they put in a big bore IV, and they transmit his EKG straight to Metro West. And Metro West says, don't even bother sending him here. This guy's too sick, bypass us, right? Send him straight to the Brigham, like fly him down I-90 right now to the Brigham. He arrives at the Brigham ER. They take one look at him and decide he's too sick to even go to the cath lab. He's going to the operating room, and he ends up with quadruple bypass surgery. He's in the cardiac care unit for 4 or 5 days. He's on the telemetry floor for another week. He gets a social work consult because he's going to get depressed because he's a guy with a heart attack. He ends up in cardiac rehab at the Brigham for 12 weeks. He has a new cardiologist. He gets his first primary care appointment in a long time. How much money we just spend on this guy? What was that? I love my front row. So probably not $1 million, but boy, it felt like $1 million. I don't know. We just sent him to a Partners Hospital in Boston. We spent a lot of money. I'm going to say we spent about $250,000 on him. That's my guess, okay? His next-door neighbor in Holliston is that young 24-year-old you're seeing lying on the ground. She has struggled with an opiate use disorder for a few years. Her parents know this about her. She's been actually doing really well. She went to a detox. She got better. She's been going to meetings. She's just started a new job a few days ago. And when her mom knocks on that bathroom door and finds that it's locked and there's no response, her mom completely freaks out and kicks the door in and finds her daughter lying on the ground blue. Her mom has been worried enough about her girl for so many years that she carries naloxone, or the drug overdose reversal drug, on her. She calls 911 first and then administers Narcan, but her daughter doesn't start to breathe. When Holliston police arrive, they carry Narcan on them, and they administer 2 vials before they actually have nothing left in the patrol car, but she still hasn't come back, and EMS at that point is there. 5 vials of Narcan later, she comes to, and she is transported by ambulance to Metro West Hospital. And what did we offer her? What was that? Not much, yeah. Nothing. Okay. I think that's probably true. I think in the best hospital systems in the entire state, maybe a recovery coach, somebody who is a peer-to-peer recovery specialist, came down and talked to her. Maybe they took out a brochure of detox beds around the state and said, let's spend the next 24 hours calling every 15 minutes, every telephone number we can find. Let me tell you a little bit more about my 68-year-old guy, because I actually didn't give you the full story on my guy. He's 68 years old. Both of his parents had heart attacks in their late 50s. In fact, his dad died at the age of 58 from a massive heart attack. He smokes a pack and a half a day. He kicks back a 12-pack of beer every day. He goes to McDonald's at the Milford exit on 498. He goes there 3 times a week. I actually don't know him, although I am his primary care doctor, because I saw him 4 years ago and said, dude, you have really badly controlled high blood pressure. We need to start you on some medicine. He never picked up the 2 prescriptions I sent in, and I never saw him again. Does this guy have addiction? What's he addicted to? Nicotine and alcohol, fat, sugar, right? Did anybody wag their finger at him in the living room and said, you know what, my friend, you actually created your heart attack, your massive anterior wall MI at the age of 68. You actually created that, because guess what he did? He did, right? Smoking is the #1 cause of death in our country. Number 3 in our country is alcohol, right? He made some lifestyle decisions that weren't perfect, right? And we didn't stake our finger and say, I'm not going to provide your medical care today, because you created this. Why would I spend $250,000 on an addict? Why would I do that, right? Did we do that to him? We didn't. We chose to do that to her, even though she was 24 years old, had at least another 70 years to live, right? The reason I do this work is I find it outrageous that we treat people so profoundly differently. Because you tell me who in this room is absolutely perfect. Who in this room makes perfect health decisions every day? Who are my marathon running vegans who never do anything wrong in this room? Where are you guys? Because maybe in this room I have some. Okay, I have one hand up. Okay, so good Lord. Okay, he's perfect. It's so funny, it's his kids who said he was perfect, which is really nice. That was a nice thing. Okay, but for the rest of us I ate Fritos and I drank a Diet Coke on the way here. And then I went to Tabletop Pizza and had a slice before coming in, right? That's how my night rolled. So am I perfect today? Not so much, right? So my point is that part of the work that we do here tonight is to help shift our thinking about people who struggle with addiction. And if we're going to start blaming and shaming people, then let's start spreading it all equally, right? I would be the worst primary care doctor ever if I spent my day making my patients feel terrible for their health decisions, right? Who doesn't need to lose 10 pounds in this room, right? Who needs to reduce their sugar intake, right? Start putting your hands up of things you're not doing great, right? It's a whole bunch of us. And instead, we meet people where they are, and we try to help shift their pathway of thinking and their path of change. That's our job, right? So the next time, I'm going to just make a suggestion for real grassroots organizing. The next time you visit your primary care doctor, I want you to ask the question, what are you doing to help people who struggle with addiction? Just ask the question. You know what? They may be doing everything under the sun, but they also may not be. And do you know who's going to change their practice? It's going to be their patients. That's who's going to change their practice. Because a lot of us went to medical school and went to residency, and we learned nothing about a disease that impacts maybe 25, 30% of Americans in one way or another, right? I learned nothing about this during my medical training. And it's an unacceptable state of affairs. I have a great Holliston High School graduate from 2004 who's living with me. It was just a coincidence. She's been living with me this month because she is in the final year of her family medicine residency in Boston. And she is this new generation of doctors who wants to take care of people with addiction. So she's living with me in Western Mass and working at the jail and at a treatment center with me. And it was just an awesome thing to bring her back to our high school to talk to you guys. So Sarah and her parents were sitting over here. Okay, so I know I veered away from dopamine, but let's go back to dopamine for a second. That middle column right there is a brain that's healthy. All those orange spots in those PET scans, that's dopamine activity. The brain column that you're seeing on the far right are brains of people addicted to a variety of substances. That top brain is cocaine, the next one down is methamphetamines, the third one down is alcohol, and the final one down is heroin. And what you see is there's not a lot of dopamine activity, right? Except for the alcohol brain. I like this slide because you can look at the brain with alcohol and there's still a surprising amount of dopamine. And what I want to remind you is the wheels come off the bus of those of us who struggle with alcohol pretty late in the game, right? It's when your husband has walked out on you, you've gotten your second OUI, you're facing some court fines, you lost your license, you just lost your job, before you say, holy smokes, I'm in trouble, right? A lot of us struggle with an alcohol use disorder. A lot of us in this room have family members who've struggled with alcohol use, and the wheels come off that bus late. Alcohol is one of the more damaging drugs in our society. It happens to be legal, but it causes a lot of damage. So we're going to talk about the setup, what it takes for people to potentially struggle with addiction. And there's three main things that are the focus here. One is a genetic risk. The second one is an early exposure while your brain is developing. And the third one is a history of childhood trauma. Having poor mental health is not necessarily, is not a precursor to having an addiction. These things often hang together. So when you're 14 years old and you have terrible anxiety and you realize after you've had 2 drinks that actually my terrible social anxiety is better, I'm a funny person when I'm drunk, you become a young person who has anxiety who exposes their brain early while the brain is developing. So it wasn't the anxiety that created the addiction, it was the anxiety that created the early exposure that then leads to addiction. So having poor mental health does not make you somebody who's a setup for addiction. It's that poor mental health can be a subcomponent of these 3 things. So let's talk about the genetic risk. The genetic risk of addiction is one of the strongest genetic disease predictors we've ever seen. If you have a parent or a grandparent who struggles with addiction, you have about a 50% chance of developing addiction yourself. So who needs to know that information? What was that? Your kids, that's right. Your kids, as uncomfortable as it may be for you, need to understand what their genetic risk is for addiction, because your kids do not get to change that. They get what they get. And you may say to yourself, well, how unfair is it for me to tell them if they don't get to change it? Your kids get to impact the next thing I get to talk about 100%. And when they impact it the right way, they actually almost get to entirely erase their genetic risk, which is why your kids need to understand what their genetic risk is, okay? We all get what we get, but you can change the outcome in this disease. So I sat down with my 3 kids and I explained to them many years ago, you know what, we have a strong genetic risk of addiction in our family. You 3 are at risk. You don't need to know the gory details, right? I didn't go into the gory details because it's irrelevant. They need to know that much data. And because of that, you 3 have got to really prevent early exposure while the brain is developing. So let's dive in on that right now. All of addiction is a developmental pediatric disease. All addiction starts while the brain is developing. If you get to the age of 24 or 25 and you haven't used an addictive substance, you're not going to develop an addiction. 99%, you're not going to develop an addiction, right? 24 or 25, we just got to scoot you along till your brain is fully developed. That's all I'm asking. Now, that seems impossible, because for those of us who are adults in this room, if you could just pause and ask yourself, did I use an addictive substance prior to the age of 24 or 25? Most of us did, right? But if you knew going into it that your genetic risk was so high, and the one thing you can do to prevent this genetic outcome is to delay your use till your brain was fully developed, right? I think a lot of our kids would make that decision, right? If I said to you, I can guarantee you, you will never die of cancer if you never eat, red, orange dye number 6, right? I mean, that's not true, by the way. Don't listen to what I said about number 6 dye. But if I said that to you, right, you would say to yourself, okay, the rest of my life, I will check the package and I will never, ever use that, right? Because most of us would prefer not to die of cancer, right? And I am telling you, we have this one way we can actually prevent the disease of addiction, which is to delay exposure till the brain is developed fully. Like, how amazing is that? And why isn't that being talked about in health class on a daily basis? Seriously. Why is this not a conversation in the average pediatric office? It's very clear. The data's clear on this stuff. So when you talk to somebody who struggles with addiction, and Dr. Sarah's been practicing this day after day, you ask the question, how old were you with your first addictive substance? Was it marijuana, alcohol, or cigarettes? Those are the 3 most likely. And how old were you when you started? And the average age of first use is what you see there. It's 12, 13, or 14. That's the average age. I give this talk at the jail where I work, so I'll have 150 guys because I work at an all-male facility. And in that room, I'll say, who was 12 years old with their first exposure to marijuana, alcohol, or cigarettes? Every hand in the room is up at 12, right? But then I start counting backwards, 11, 10, 9. And as I count backwards, I feel sick, right? Because these are my people, right? These are some of the sickest people in society. They've been incarcerated. They're not doing well. There's a lot of mental illness. I get to the age of 6. I have hands in the air at the age of 6, right? That's a first grader. A first grader drinking vodka, a first grader lighting a cigarette. How is that possible, right? It's unimaginable to most of us, but it's the lives that people have been exposed to. So when you are 15 years old and you start drinking, and 15 here define drinking as 2 drinks a week. Very light drinking by most people's standards, but at the age of 15, drinking 2 drinks a week, 40% of those 15-year-olds go on to be alcoholics. If you wait until age 21, 7% go on to be alcoholics. The rate of alcohol use disorder in this country is now 13%. It's actually one of the highest levels we've ever seen. So if you wait till 21, you have cut in half the likelihood, you've cut in half the national average of becoming an alcoholic, right? I didn't even get to 25, I said 21. So this is the message we send to our kids: you have to delay your use, right? I don't sit up here with a cooked egg in a frying pan and say, just say no to drugs. I stand here with you and say, why don't we educate our kids about brain development and just let them know about what we think the facts are on this, right? Educate our kids. That's what your school district is doing. That is what your superintendent is doing. I really think our kids are up for this knowledge, right? Our kids are smart. They can handle this. And the truth is, our kids are making the best decisions about substances that we have seen in 40 years. You guys saw the data on Holliston Public Schools. Holliston happens to be doing particularly well. You guys have some neighboring school districts that don't look nearly as good, because I see this data school by school. So I have to say, you guys are doing a good job in this district. I would love to see the last 30-day use data. All of this is available because the school has all of this. But our kids in this generation should be patted on the back for making awesome decisions. The one place we see the best decision-making is around cigarette use. If you ask, let me just ask, what do you think about cigarette smoking? I already heard it. Disgusting, right? How old are you? Well, I don't know. Yeah, how old are you? You're 50. How old are you? 15? You're 15. Did you think it's disgusting, cigarette smoking? So I'm going to say, the average 15-year-old, I might ask this question: what do you think of cigarette smoking? The answer is, it's disgusting, right? It makes you old. It gives you wrinkles. It gives you, my daughter says, it gives you bladder cancer. I'm thinking to myself, how does she know it gives you bladder cancer? Where'd she read that? It happens to be true. But the level of knowledge, the level of disgust, the level of sense of cigarettes are harmful to me is huge amongst this generation. And guess who's not smoking? If we had stuck to the President Obama administration public health interventions, the prediction was that we would be at 0% cigarette smoking by the year 2025. That is around the corner, right? That is how good we've gotten on cigarettes. And this generation is making great decisions about it. The problem is that as the sense of harm with marijuana has gone down, the use has gone up. You don't see that in your data locally. I am telling you that the use will be going up in the next 3 to 5 years. And that is a major concern to me, and I'm going to tell you very clearly why. You guys are going to be sick of my marijuana slides in 1 minute, but I don't want you to be. I feel like the level of public knowledge about marijuana is really low, and it's a big concern. As a public health person, it concerns me. So 3 things happen in the middle school at Holliston, in the high school at Holliston. 3 things are happening with the developing brain. And in fact, some of these 3 things, the only time they happen is between the ages of 12 and 24. There are critical brain changes happening between the ages of 12 and 24. The first one is something called synaptic refinement. Your brains have tens of billions of connections, tens of billions. And in fact, that is way too many. It leaves this tangled mess of a brain. And between the ages of 12 and 24 and no other time, you are pruning back your brain. You are getting rid of connections in the brain that are no longer necessary, and you're choosing to keep the ones that are helpful. This is an amazing thing that is happening to our teenage brains. It's an awesome thing, and it's why you want them to be walking laps at lunch and meditating and doing some yoga and playing on a team sport and putting, decorating these beautiful sets for Greece. This is what you want your kids' brains to be doing while they're making decisions about what stays and what goes, right? The other thing that happens during this stage is something called myelination, or ensheathing efficient pathways in the brain. This, too, the only time it's really happening is during these teenage years. So these teenage brains of ours are spectacular brains. And these brains that, as a parent of 3 teenagers, sometimes gives me palpitations and makes me crazy. These are amazing, remarkable, healthy, normal brains, because these brains are pushing the envelope every single day, right? They tend to have more risky, impulsive behavior. They tend to be act first and think later. There's less than optimal planning. There's less consideration for negative consequences. There's an emotional spectrum that is incredibly wide. I'm not picking on my 15-year-old girls in the room, but I am going to say as the mother of a 15-year-old girl, man, the emotional spectrum is huge, right? She can look at me and tell me she loves me and I'm the greatest mother ever, and literally 7 seconds later she is screaming at me in tears. And I haven't even said anything. 7 seconds, I didn't even open my mouth, right? So anybody else parenting a daughter in this room, a teenage daughter? It's challenging, right? And I'm not throwing the girls under the bus, but I definitely found my boy a little easier than this. So this is a nice, normal, healthy brain, though. That giant emotional spectrum, these are our kids who are trying to figure out what needs to stay and what needs to go. You don't get to do this any other time. After the age of 25, it's all atrophying, right? All of our brains are getting worse and worse and worse. Sorry, right? Yeah, great. Okay, there is never a time in your life when you're more influenced by your peers, ever, ever. And I want us to pause, okay? I want you to think about a second grader, a 7-year-old on the playground, and then one of their friends says, let's go do this really stupid thing. And when you're 7, you're like, I think that seems really scary and stupid. I'm going to go tell the teacher. And when you're 27 and one of your buddies says, let's go do this stupid thing, you're like, dude, you're an idiot. I'm not going to do that. But when you're 15 and 17 and one of your friends says to do this, you're like, yeah, I'm in, right? Because this age is all about finding your herd. Really, the teenage years, you're trying to find your people desperately. And it's one of the reasons why being a teenager is so hard, is you're desperately trying to find your people. And man, if you have 1 or 2 good quality friends, you're golden. But so much of our time when we're teenagers is feeling like we don't fit in, and so-and-so doesn't like me, and am I popular? It's a really, really challenging time. Who in this room would go back and relive high school again? Come on, my runner? Okay. So isn't that interesting, right? I mean, like, I would live my 20s again. 20s were awesome, right? For me, they were really great. But I would never, ever go back to middle school or high school again because they were hard years. They were fun sometimes, but they were hard. So my point is these brains are doing exactly what they need to be doing, and our job as loving adults and teachers and as law enforcement is to help support these brains in as many positive ways. And I have to say, when I reviewed your superintendent's brief bio, your superintendent in the school district is working so hard to decrease the stress on a generation that is living under more pressure and more stress than most of us have ever seen. So it's a real shout out to this district. I'm really impressed with it. I don't see that. I speak all over the place in New England, and I'm impressed with what Holliston's doing. So good work. Okay, so we said there's 3 things that happen during this time. I only covered 2 of them, synaptic refinement and myelination. The third thing that happens is you lay down receptors in the brain. So you lay down your dopamine receptors. That happens in the outer cortex of the brain. The second receptor that gets laid down is a receptor called anandamide. And anandamide is a naturally occurring endocannabinoid. And we think the part of this receptor's job is to figure out what stays and what goes in the brain. The problem with anandamide is that it is the mirror image of a drug called THC, or tetrahydrocannabinoid, the psychoactive ingredient in marijuana. So this critical receptor is being laid down and introduced to your brain at the same time that a lot of our kids are exposing their brain to a mirror image synthetic component or organically grown in my backyard ingredient called THC. So the problem is that your brain is unable to differentiate THC from a marijuana plant or from a vape pipe or from an edible product like a gummy bear. It can't differentiate your naturally occurring chemical from the stuff that it gets exposed to. And the THC is more potent and actually knocks the naturally occurring anandamide out of the way. So here I have a chemical whose job it is to determine what goes and what stays in my brain, and it's getting booted out of the way by marijuana. That is not good for the developing brain. So I will say publicly, I say it publicly every week, what an adult brain over the age of 25 does with marijuana in their own house when they're not going to affect any other human being, I don't actually care. I do not think it is any worse than marijuana for the adult brain. You should never drive. You should not put the lug nuts on my car. You should not operate on my knee. You should not take care of my kids if you're high on marijuana. But what you do in your own house over the age of 25, I don't care. But under the age of 25, I feel very strongly that marijuana is a neurotoxic drug that is impacting the normal development of our teenager brains, right? But you know who doesn't believe that? Most people under the age of 25. The level of knowledge that our younger people have, which, by the way, comes from this thing called Google, right, about marijuana, appears to them to be huge. And the first 999 pages on Google are positive, right? They're all good. What do teenagers might say about marijuana? What do you guys hear? What's the talk about pot? It's natural, it's organic, it's better than the pharmaceutical industry. Thank you very much. What else? Awesome. You tried it, you turned out fine, or in fact, you use it actively. There are a lot of parents who use a lot of marijuana around their kids, or in fact, give it to their kids. That's a good one. I don't usually hear that one. What else? You two said it at the same time. You always hear it's safer than alcohol, very specifically. Yep. What else? It's not addictive. Yep. What else? It's medical. It helps me. It helps my anxiety. It helps me sleep. I've had kids say it makes me study better. It makes my grades better. It makes me perform better on the athletic field. That one cracks me up because I am sorry. There's perform right? Because this is a drug that very specifically slows your reaction time. So I don't know what sport they're playing. They must be like in Tai Chi is the only sport where I think slowed reaction time is a benefit. But I hear that one. So you guys have covered. You covered the list. So that is what the average teenager might say about marijuana. What we really know about marijuana, again, while the brain is developing, teenage exposure to marijuana, very good evidence that it has an impact on attention, verbal learning, memory, processing speed, and that stays even when you're not high. This is data, and I want to spend time on the slide because I know the slides are small and they're far away, but I'm going to explain it to you. This is a study that looks at exposure to marijuana while the brain is developing between the ages of 15 and 21. And I'm going to compare the two extremes just to make the point more cleanly. So it's going to compare people who used marijuana 0 times between the ages of 15 and 21. And I'm going to compare it to the category of people who used marijuana 400 times or more between the ages of 15 and 21. Now I want to pause and say 400 times is not a lot of times. That's just every other day use. I have kids who wake up in the morning and they take their first hit of pot, and then they vape it in the school bathroom at 11, and then they use it as soon as they get home to help them with their homework, and they use it at dinner, and they use it to sleep. So that's 5 times in a day. So my point is 400 times or more in a 6-year span is not that much. So let's look at the population that used marijuana 0 times. The graduating from university by age 25 for 0 use is 36%. Graduating from university for 400 times or more was 2%. This is coming out of New Zealand and Australia. Unemployment rate for 0 use by age 25 was 21%. Unemployment rate for 400 times or more was 52% by age 25. And then, again, these are New Zealand and Australian data, so they have a larger state welfare system. But dependency on the state welfare system for those who used 0 times was 25%. Those who used 400 times or more was 57%. That, for me, is a generation that failed to launch, right? I love my 3 kids. I want them to leave my house at a certain age and be gone and pay taxes and be responsible citizens. I don't want them living in my house. I love them, but I want them to move on, right? Maybe I'm the only parent in the world who believes that or says that. But what I don't want to have is a generation of kids who are hanging out on the couch in my basement because their brain has become, they're in the world that we call couch lock, right? There's a concept of couch lock, which is you use enough marijuana and you are so unmotivated, you cannot get off the couch to do anything, right? You're just flipping through Game of Thrones all day or whatever it is that you're doing. This same data looks at follows the same people up through age 40, but it shows an 8-point drop in IQ by the age of 35. The problem with all of this data is it's all based on the old marijuana. So marijuana in the 70s, 80s, all the way through the 90s was THC levels of 3% or less. There's not a single field-grown plant of marijuana that the DEA has confiscated in the last 5 years that is anywhere less than 10%. It's mostly 10 to 16% THC. That's what's being grown in the fields everywhere right now. So all the data I just showed you is based on old marijuana without a lot of THC. And if you think your brain is getting better with higher IQ and higher success and job seeking and going to college with a higher THC level, then I'd love to sell you a bridge anywhere, because that is crazy thinking, right? Here I am already incredibly concerned about the impact it's having on the brain, and then you start to look at the concentrates. So the field-grown stuff may be sitting at 16%. This stuff, which is shatter and butter and earwax, this is sitting between 70 and 90% THC. This is what our kids understand. This is, if you handed a fat rolled joint to the average 17-year-old in college, they may not even know what this is. But if you found this, any of this in your kid's room, I mean, most of us would pick it up with a Kleenex and be like, oh my God, what is that stuff, right? 70 to 90% THC. This stuff is incredibly potent. And as everybody knows in this room, you know, the fat rolled joint is a thing of the past. You can use marijuana in lots of ways. You can smoke it, you can vape it, you can eat it in spaghetti sauce, in ice cream, in beer, in chocolate. It comes in every form imaginable. And this is coming to a dispensary near you, but not in a dispensary in the great town of Holliston, because your town has voted twice now. Somehow twice. I don't know how that worked out. More than twice? Yeah. A third time? Right. You guys have voted out recreational marijuana stores, which is great. You're going to have a neighbor that does not vote it out very clearly, and it doesn't take much to get on the road and buy stuff. So what we see available in stores is this stuff. Right, so this is directly from the marijuana dispensaries in Colorado, where there are more dispensaries than there are Starbucks and McDonald's combined. There are blocks of Boulder and Denver where there are 2 or 3 dispensaries on the same block. Has anybody been to Colorado recently? Did you see any of this stuff? Pretty prevalent? It's all over the place. How'd that make you feel? You're going there for sabbatical in January, and it worries you a little bit. Okay. What was your experience?
Yeah, I was there for work, and we actually went into one.
Yeah, no, I would go in too. I want to check them out. Yep. Yeah. They want to sell you the stuff. So this stuff here is marketed to your kids. This is mixed with sugar and chocolate and fat, and it is targeted to the younger generation, right? If you are selling an addictive substance, your job is to addict as many people as possible, right? That is what the market would say. And if I am telling you that all addiction starts while the brain is developing, this is an industry, right, whose job it is to make billions of dollars, right? Follow the money, my friends. And so their drive is to addict as many young brains as possible. That's the way they survive. So this stuff is being absolutely marketed to your kids, right? Those candy bars there, which are directly out of dispensaries in Colorado, have 12 servings of marijuana in them. They are THC levels of 70 to 90%. The last time anybody in this room shared a Kit Kat with 11 other people was never, ever in your life, right? 12 servings of marijuana at 70 to 90%. And what happens in an emergency room setting, I don't know who works in an emergency room, but I saw the head of emergency services for Colorado speak about 2 years after Colorado became legal. And his emergency room is filled with people who are actively psychotic with marijuana overdose. You don't die with a marijuana overdose. That is true. You will not overdose with respiratory depression. There have been 2 deaths, at least in Colorado, based on marijuana because people were psychotic. They jumped out of a building, and in one case, a man shot his wife. He was psychotic. So 12 servings at 70, 90% THC, right? You're going to often get sick. And who's more prone to psychosis? Young people are, right? We know that for a fact. So I make an argument that we should have learned our lesson from big tobacco a long time ago, right? In the year 1900, almost nobody in this country smoked cigarettes. Tobacco is a natively grown North American plant. It's been here for millennia. The native people of this country were not smoking 2 packs a day, right? They used it ritually. But in the year 1900, the industry took over tobacco. And the first thing they did is they grew a more potent tobacco plant, thicker veins that contain more nicotine. That's the first thing the tobacco industry did. I just told you, we've already been doing that with marijuana. The second thing they did is they combined it with all kinds of other addictive chemicals and wrapped it up in a little piece of paper and called it a cigarette. So in the year 1900 in this country, less than 1% of Americans smoked cigarettes. And by the year 1950, 70% of American men were smoking, right? It's the #1 killer in our country. In 7 years from now, we could have gotten down to 0 cigarettes. And instead, what have we done? We've handed the tobacco industry the new industry of the marijuana industry. And their intention will be able to hook as many young people as possible. And who's going to stop them? People in this room. It's not going to be pretty. I feel like if everybody knew what you guys now know tonight, this ballot measure wouldn't have passed, right? But it's too late. It's happened. It's our future. Okay, let's talk about alcohol. So in this country, 1/3 of us drink absolutely zero. 0, 1/3 of us drink very lightly, a drink or 2 a week, a drink or 2 a month, very light social drinkers. The final 1/3 of us drink all of the rest of the alcohol in the country. And in fact, the final 10% of us drink on average 9 to 10 drinks a day. Now, I often get that reaction of, holy smokes. Now, first of all, I'm going to make a statement. I think most of those people drinking 9 to 10 drinks a night aren't here tonight because you needed to have started already, right? That's how I think about it. But when you look at the national statistics, 13% of us are alcoholics in this country. That is a huge number. So I want to remind us what a drink is. So I ask this question every day in my office. Tell me about your relationship to alcohol. And people will say, oh, you know, I have a couple drinks. And my female patients will look at me and say, you know, I have a couple drinks. And I'm like, oh, yeah, what are you drinking? And they say, I drink wine. And I'm like, oh, yeah, what's going in a glass? And they're like, you know, it's a wine glass, right? So we're talking giant wine goblets, mason jars on a stem. That's what a lot of women are pouring themselves these days. And a 5-ounce glass of wine is considered 1 glass of wine. And what I say to my patients is, I need you to measure what's going in your glasses. I need you just to put 5 ounces of water into your wine goblet and acknowledge that that's 1 drink. That's all I'm asking you to do. I'm not judging you, right? No judgment from me. But if you could acknowledge that really most nights you're pouring yourself 3 glasses of wine and you have 2 of them, that really every night you're taking in 6 glasses of wine, you need to acknowledge what you're drinking, right? And I'm actually talking to us in this room because I'm a woman who works as hard as everybody else does in this room, and I'm going to exclude my men in the room for a minute, but I know what it's like to be a working mom, right? You're up wicked early, you're dealing with last night's dishes, you actually are walking the dog, you've got a full 8 or 12-hour day ahead of you, and then you come home and you have like 6 more hours of work to do. Like, who has more work to do when they get home tonight? Every single one of us, right? Women's lives have become really stressful, and it's become very normal for women to turn to alcohol to manage their stress. Mommy juice, right? You see these pictures of like wine in a sippy cup. And I'm going to say the western suburbs of Boston have become a little bit known for a lot of alcohol consumption among women, right? You do your yoga class at 3, and you open up wine with your girlfriends by 5. And all I'm saying is the message we send to our kids when we've had a terrible long day at work and we haul into the house and we're exhausted, and what our kids see is that we're popping off the top of a beer bottle or we're uncorking another bottle of wine. The message we send to our kids is when you're stressed, when you're overwhelmed, if you drink, you will feel better. And what if many of us walked home after a terrible day at work and said, man, I am tired. I'm going to go on a walk with the dog. Anybody want to come with me? I'm going to go turn on my John Kabat-Zinn app on my phone, and I'm going to go sit in my little yoga mat in the corner, and I'm going to do a 10-minute seated meditation because I know it will make me feel better on a day I'm not feeling so good. If we were able to model ourselves as adults healthy behaviors, it would be better for our kids. And we're in a school district that is trying to model healthy behaviors for stress management every single day. And as adults, my question to you is, are you actually doing that yourself, right? Who in this room actually meditates? Not many of us, right? It's a shockingly low number. It's a very helpful way to manage stress and anxiety. I know what it's like. I am not a non-drinker, guys. I drink too, but I've become very aware of when and how I drink. I really do. And I try to make sure that my kids see me with other adult friends not drinking, having actual adult parties when alcohol's not involved, right? When's the last time that happened? So ask yourself about your alcohol. I'm going to say one more thing about alcohol, because I have found this more true in Metro West than anywhere else. The parents' modeling of alcohol, obviously, big impact on your kids. The availability of alcohol to your kids seems really high to me. So my alcohol at my house is under lock and key. It lives in a cabinet with a lock on it. And when I came home from the hardware store one day and my kids saw me drilling that lock onto the cabinet, all three of them were like, "Mom, what, don't you trust us?" And I was like, "No, I don't trust you," right? Why would I make it any easier for you to drink than it already is, right? My 15-year-old cannot walk into a liquor store, right? My 20-year-old can't actually walk into a liquor store and buy anything. But most of us have alcohol freely available in our homes that our kids will take. I went to high school in the 1980s. I know what we did to our parents' liquor cabinets, right? And I think other people in the room will confirm that you did the same thing. So if your house has liquor available, I think you should ask yourself where it is kept and is it kept safe. Okay, third thing that puts our kids at risk for developing addiction. That was so long ago that no one's even going to remember that slide. The first thing was genetics. The second one was early exposure while the brain is developing. And the third one is something called adverse childhood experiences, or an ACE score. So who in this room knows about ACE scores? Awesome. Are you guys behavioral health people? Are you guidance counselors? What are you? Behavioral health? Social worker? A prevention specialist? Who else had that? Yeah, what do you do? I have a school committee member who knows about ACE scores, though? Seriously? I love my school committee. That's awesome. Okay. So it's not normal that I get that many hands up on an ACE score. So this study came out in 1996, I think. And it was one of the biggest studies done. It's a beautiful study. It surveyed 17,000 people in San Diego County under Kaiser. And it asked an adult, what might have happened to you under the age of 18 in your household growing up? And it went in asking this question, actually trying to get the answer to a question that they didn't end up answering. Or they did, but in an indirect way. So I'm actually in this room right now. I actually have older teenagers. I don't have anybody younger. So I'm going to go through some of these questions because they're appropriate for everybody in this room to understand what I'm talking about. So no one can read this slide, but I want you to understand what I'm talking about here. 10 questions, yes or no. What might have happened to you under the age of 18? Did a parent or another adult in your household often or very often swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, or often act in a way that made you afraid that you might be physically harmed? Did a parent or another adult in the household often or very often push, grab, slap, or throw something at you, or ever hit you so hard that you had marks? Were you ever sexually abused? Did you often or very often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special, or that your family didn't look out for each other, feel close to each other, or support each other? Did you often or very often feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, and had no one to protect you, or that your parents were too drunk or too high to take you to the doctor if you were sick? Were your parents separated or divorced? Was there somebody in your household with major mental illness? Was there somebody in your household who was incarcerated? Did you ever watch your father physically abuse your mother or your stepmother? I may be missing one, but this is the 10 questions that are asked. So in this survey, which is a measure of household neglect, household abuse, and household dysfunction, 54% of Americans score at least a 1. That's not a surprise. Divorce is on this list. Divorce is not quite 50% anymore nationwide, but divorce alone gets you an ACE score of 1. I am an ACE score of 1. My parents were divorced when I was 13. But really, nothing else on that list ever happened to me. If you score a 6 or a higher on an ACE score, you're going to die 20 years earlier. If you score a 4 or higher on an ACE score, you're going to have a much higher risk of having a heart attack, emphysema, asthma, 30 or more sexual partners, multiple broken bones. This is one of the best predictors we have of developing long-term chronic diseases that put you in the grave. And that seems crazy, that having a terrible childhood would cause you to have asthma or emphysema. How does that make any sense? But when you are a human being living on this planet and you have a fearful, terrifying thing happen to you, you have a spike in cortisol, right? You have this great adrenaline rush that says, I must run away from this bear that is chasing me. And you have this rush that gives you that energy, a nice sympathetic fight or flight response, and then you run to safety after 20 minutes, you cower down in your cave, and you calm down. But when you are a child living in a household with this much dysfunction and abuse, you actually are living in a sympathetic fight or flight state all the time, 24 hours a day. When you are worried about how you will be fed tomorrow, where you are worried about whether your family members are safe, your mother is going to survive, you're worried about whether you might come home from first grade and find that your father is overdosed in the bathroom. You are in a constant state of vigilance and fear. And living like that for days, weeks, years on end has an impact on every organ that develops in your body. So this thing, this notion of childhood trauma and its impact on long-term health is actually a public health crisis. And if there's one thing we can do as adults is to help keep all of our kids safe, not just the kids that we're raising in our own homes, but actually making sure that other people's kids are safe. It's actually one of the roles of teachers and educators and social workers and guidance counselors and school nurses and the police is they are helping to keep our kids safe, right? This has an enormous impact on our overall well-being. Having a high ACE score is one of the biggest predictors for developing an addiction. Because when you have been living in fear your whole life, there's no better way to run away than to escape with drugs or alcohol. Because you want to numb up. You can't stand feeling that pain. And when you ask people who struggle with addiction, and you sit down with them and have them do their ACE score, routinely the numbers are unbelievably high. Our kids don't get to choose their ACE scores, right? But as adults, who maybe actually have high ACE scores ourselves, we can make sure the ACE scores for our kids are as low as possible. That's sort of our goal as a society, I would say. Okay, 3 things: genetics plus trauma plus early exposure while the brain is developing. And my message to you is to talk to your kids. Talk to your kids in the classroom, talk to your kids at Sunday school, talk to your kids at your dining room table. The message is to delay use as long as possible. I don't say to my kids, don't ever drink, it's going to kill you. Don't ever use pot, it's going to kill you. I do say to them, don't ever smoke cigarettes, because I hate cigarettes, right? But I tell them to delay their use as long as possible. So again, our kids are making awesome decisions every day. Alcohol use in the last 40 years has gone down. Cigarettes has gone down. Illicit drugs is actually flat. Even that includes marijuana. The exception here is vaping and e-cigarettes, and what the superintendent said is true. Actually, the vape rates that we find in the western suburbs are surprisingly high. There's a lot of vaped products, and what our teenagers think is, oh, it's fine, it's just like a flavor, it's a watermelon cotton candy flavored pen, it's all good. I want to be clear, this stuff is manufactured in China. Some of it comes out of India. It is largely unregulated. We have no idea what is in those cartridges. There's at least some formaldehyde. I'd like to not put formaldehyde in my kids' beautiful lungs, but also what is in these cartridges is often nicotine. So I've taken a society that is trying to get rid of nicotine, which is a huge success story, and I've replaced it with nicotine from China in a flavored pen. What? Right? So don't presume that your kid knows what they're doing with a vape pen. I presume we find some vape pens at every school. I don't know what the rate is here, but if I found a vape pen in my kid's room, I would be very concerned. Talk to your kids that vaping is not a safe health decision. There's no health benefit to vaping. I am going to spend one slide just talking about the addiction to our devices. This generation is going to be known as the I generation. The 10 to 18-year-old phase is the first generation that has really developed their entire brain life with a device in their hands. So this is a great article that's worth you guys going back and reading. That's from The Atlantic in August of 2017. That talks about the really high rates of anxiety, depression, and really just a hard time interacting with other human beings that the I generation has developed. And I can tell you, as a parent, this is the hardest thing I parent. Does anybody else struggle with the devices at home? Anybody else had an argument in the last month about the darn devices, right? Man, I hate them. I want to throw them all off a bridge some days. I want to click a switch in my house that just powers it all down. I want all of them to explode every day after they've been used by like an hour and a half, whatever the limit should be, they all turn off, right? Why can't that happen? Why can't that happen? There's good technology. Why is MIT not working on this today? Because as a parent, this is the hardest thing we do. So again, The Atlantic, September 2017 issue. It's an excellent article. Okay, I think people come to this talk thinking I'm going to talk about heroin. I actually spend all day, every day talking about heroin, but I want to tell you a tiny bit about where we are in terms of the opiate crisis. Every day I get up and I read the newspaper and I walk my dog, and every day the first thing I do is I read the obituaries, not because I'm morbid, but because I'm a family doctor who takes care of people who are sick, and every day I need to know who died, because I have to fill out their death certificate and I need to call the family. It's been my pattern for my entire life as a doctor. So in December of 2012, I read the obituary of the young woman in the upper left in that red city year jacket. And her obituary read, Ashley Sims, age 21, died of a heroin overdose at home. I live in a small part of the state where I know everybody, and I thought to myself, I know Ashley and I know her grandmothers who raised her as a baby. And I called her two grandmothers and told them how sick I was about the news of Ashley's death, but also to thank them for telling the truth, finally, about how Ashley had died. Because for years I'd been reading obituaries of young people dying unexpectedly at home or in a hospital, right? Because we have all read those obituaries. I know you have read them too. And finally, I had people who were telling the truth. And those two brave grandmothers went to the local newspaper and said, you need to start telling the story of what the opiate epidemic is doing to our community. And this is in the year 2012, right? So that's almost 6 years ago now. It was actually the beginning of Massachusetts really focusing on this issue. And the front page of the Little Greenfield Recorder ran stories day after day, month after month, about the opiate epidemic and what it was doing. And little tiny Greenfield, Massachusetts, in Franklin County, which is the smallest, most rural and poorest county in the state of Massachusetts, has really led the effort on the opiate epidemic. Because we really were out ahead of it, and we all get along really well. We all went to high school together, so it's easy to get things done when you all went to high school together. There's no doubt in my mind that pills were on the hook for this. The overprescribing of opiates for the last 20 years definitely started the epidemic. I don't think it's what's killing people now, but it definitely was the beginning of it. When you look at us in comparison to every other country in the world, we are by far the largest prescriber of opiate prescriptions. When you look at drug deaths in comparison to every other accidental death, gun violence, car accidents, AIDS at the peak of the AIDS epidemic, drug deaths have now surpassed all of that. We're losing between 91 and 140 Americans every day to opiate overdose, every single day. Do people know people who've died in this room? Yeah. You've had graduates from this high school who have died. So when you look at the map of the nation in terms of drug overdoses, that top map that you're seeing on the top left is 2003, and you just watch the progression of the red. The red is overdose deaths. And it only goes to 2014, which is really before fentanyl even hit us. But look how much of the country has turned red at that point. Most of the opiates that came to New England actually came up what we knew as Oxy Highway, I-95. So Massachusetts has never been a big prescribing opiate state. When you looked at the statistics for the last 15 years, Massachusetts was 41, 42, 44 in the country in terms of opiate prescribing. We don't have pill mills. Most of the bad doctors who overprescribed have been put out of business. We've worked really hard on that in the last 8 years. But when I was in residency and when I was working at Boston Medical Center, we always called I-95 Oxy Highway because the pills were coming up from Florida. So Florida had 600 pain pill mill clinics. You would walk into any strip mall and there would be at least one pain pill mill place, and all you needed was cash. And there would be buses that got sent down from Maine and Kentucky and western Massachusetts, and you got your full stay in a hotel and all your meals paid for, and you were given a wad of cash. And all you needed to do was to walk into one of these pain clinics, hand them your cash, and you walked out with a stack of scripts and a bag of pills. You would then hand that off to your tour operator, who would go back to Kentucky and Maine and western Mass and sell everything. So in the year 2009, the federal government shut it down. The federal government looked at the state of Florida and said, if you cannot keep your pills out of the rest of our states, we are going to cut off all federal funding. You're going to lose your federal education funds. We're going to shut down your airports. You're done. The federal government was ticked about this. And all of a sudden, Florida was like, oh, I guess we have some trouble. So they shut down nearly every one of the 600 pill mills in the state of Florida. 34 doctors were incarcerated. They're still in jail because they weren't doctors, although they had medical licenses and had been trained in this country. They were all drug dealers. The problem is you shut down every pill mill, and you have all of I-95 and its neighboring states filled with people struggling with addiction. What are you left with? Yeah, you're left with beautiful, pure, cheap heroin. And the Mexican cartels, I'm going to show you some books at the end that will describe how this happened. The Mexican cartels had been preparing for years for this to happen. The distribution of really pure, really inexpensive, $3 a bag heroin had already started everywhere. It's a non-violent or very low violent drug trade. It's very high tech. I could text somebody in about 4 minutes. I could get as much heroin as you want in the lobby. It's just the way it rolls. It comes in here by Uber and Lyft and FedEx and UPS and airplanes. It is a very hard system that no wall is going to shut down. So when you ask EMS workers in the country, what is the #1 drug of concern to you, the dark green areas, the answer is heroin. And what's amazing to me when I look at this map is what's up with the Southeast? Like I-95 went through the Southeast. Why aren't they chock-a-block full of heroin, right? And the answer is the following. When you look at those dark purple states, those are states where on average there's between 1 and 1.5 bottles of opiates per person still in that state. This is 2015 data. So we still have states in the country that have huge amount of prescribing. And as long as you have pills on the street, you don't need the heroin, right? And in fact, the pills are pretty cheap, right? The pills in New England are wicked expensive, which is why you turn to the heroin. But those dark purple states are pill states, filled with pills. When you look at the country, the red and orange states that I'm showing you, those are states where the #1 problem is heroin. So if you can imagine those dark purple states on this map in the next 3 years, when the federal government changes its guidelines about who can prescribe how much, when, and why, when CVS says, as it did a month ago, we will no longer fill prescriptions for more than 7 days, CVS manages 26% of all prescriptions in the nation. Right? And so when you have entities, businesses and governments saying you must change your prescribing practices, those purple states will become red states. And if you think Alabama and Arkansas are building methadone clinics right now, that they're having community forums like this at night, that they have their uniformed officers carrying Narcan in patrol cars in Arkansas, we will lose likely 500,000 people in a span of a couple years in the Southeast due to overdose by heroin. These are the unintended consequences of making better public health decisions, right? Am I glad the pill mills shut down? Mm-hmm. Did I want people to die from heroin? I didn't, right? And if the Southeast can have learned from what just happened to us and what is happening to us on an everyday basis, you would think, right, they would make different public health decisions. But the Southeast, not to throw the Southeast under a bus, but I tend to do that, they're not known for spending a lot of money on good public health decisions. So we're in this as a nation for a lot longer. This problem is not going away. And I have high dopamine levels. I am a positive golden retriever, although I don't look it today. Okay, so let's talk about our kids and opiates. In general, what your superintendent showed you is right. Our kids are not using opiates at high levels, right? In general, the rates of heroin use among teenagers is very low, and thank God the use of prescription pills that are not prescribed to them has gone down. And why is that? Because most every adult in this room has done their job, right? If you are an adult who has a medicine cabinet that has oxycodone and Vicodin and Xanax and some Ritalin in it, well, first of all, shame on you, because I'm in the end of 2017. The fact that I could ever have a public conversation advocating that people get those drugs out of their house, that's like a 2012 conversation. I'm done with that conversation. Everything in your house that is under active use should be kept under lock and key. Lisinopril, an ACE inhibitor for blood pressure, will kill a 5-year-old, right? Medicines are dangerous. Tylenol overdose. My kids are not allowed to take any medicine at the house without talking to me, not because I'm a doctor, but because I'm a parent, right? Do I think my kids know the difference between Advil, Motrin, and Tylenol? Of course they don't, right? Most adults can't tell me the difference between those drugs, right? Your medicine should be kept controlled by adults. If you have an active controlled substance that you're actively using, it should be kept under lock and key. Otherwise, get it the hell out of your house. Excuse my language. It belongs in a police drop back, which you guys have at Holliston. Get it out of your house. Do it tomorrow. Really? Seriously. You don't need to save that oxycodone from your root canal for a rainy day. Get it out of your house. But again, where do our kids get it? They get it actually when they're prescribed. So you have a girl soccer player and they have an ACL tear that gets reconstructed, they're going to be given oxycodone. Your kid gets a root canal, your kid gets wisdom teeth, they're going to get prescribed an opiate. So can anybody tell me in the last couple years about an oral surgery that might have happened in your family? Did anybody get prescribed? What did you get prescribed, do you know? I want you to spread the information about who that oral surgeon is, because that is the oral surgeon that everybody in this room should use. Did you hear her answer? Her answer was, I was prescribed absolutely nothing. They told me to combine Tylenol and Motrin, which in combination works as well as a 5 milligram oxycodone. So that person needs to be celebrated. Who? What else? Right, so you filled a script. How many was in that script? Okay, and how many did you use? Okay. So I have done these talks, and I've now asked this question to maybe 20,000 people, okay? So the first, years ago when I did these talks, the answer was, how many were you given? And people said, I was given 30, right? For a root canal, 30, right? I had my knee surgery, I had knee surgery 5 days ago. I got a prescription for 50 oxycodone. I'm 48 years old, I'm an athlete, 50 oxycodone, right? I thought to myself, this guy has no idea who I am. And he doesn't. He just moved to the area, but next week, he's going to know who I am. Because I did not fill that script. I kept it on my desk because I'm going to hand it right back to him, because I couldn't believe, and he never screened me for addiction, right? He doesn't know anything about me. Right? His presumption is I'm a doctor, I don't have addiction. Boy, that's a bad presumption. His presumption should be that I am like every other person. You should screen out the people who are at high risk. So in the last 2 years, I am hearing back from people that people are getting fewer. That's a good thing, right? I don't hear 30 and 60 anymore. For oral surgery, I'm hearing things like 10 or 12. That's a much more reasonable number. But when I ask the question, how many did you use? The answer is always 0, 2, 4, or 6. I have never heard in an oral surgery procedure anybody using more than 6. Except for one day from the back of the room, somebody said, I used 60. And I thought, well, there's an oral surgeon I don't want to see, right? And I looked at that person, and then he said, but I'm an addict. And I thought, yeah, that's right. So the next time you go for oral surgery and you need something, ask for 6 or fewer, because that is the amount that you're going to probably use. Any pharmacy in the state of Massachusetts, you can get a partial fill, meaning I could have walked in with my 50 and said, don't give me 50, give me 10. I thought about doing that in case the pain was really bad. The other 40 get wasted. You don't get to go back tomorrow and get them. They're gone, right? But that's the one thing you can do as a patient or a parent to control it. If the doctors, me, can't control my prescribing, then at least you get to control it. I don't want to run out of time, so I'm just going to say a couple more slides here. One is, if you have somebody you love who struggles anywhere in your life, then you yourself should carry Narcan, which is naloxone, which is the drug reversal agent. It's a nasal spray. It's like over-the-counter Flonase. It's that easy to use. You are not going to be, there's Good Samaritan laws in Massachusetts, so even if you give it to somebody who's having a seizure on the ground, first of all, will it cause them any harm? No. Will it help them out of their seizure? No. Right? But a Good Samaritan law means that you can't get in trouble. So if you have somebody you love, or you actually are a nurse and you actually are a first responder, because I'm going to tell you, somebody goes down, they're looking at you. I carry Narcan on me. It's in my bag and it's in my car because I've been in situations where I've needed to use it. Narcan is available without a prescription at every pharmacy in the state of Massachusetts. CVS and Walgreens are the two big ones, but a guideline came out a month ago that says by law now every pharmacy in Massachusetts has to carry it. No prescription, it gets run under your insurance. They don't have any right to ask you who you're using it for or why. It's none of their business. If they do, they should be reported. I want to talk to you about what it takes to get better, because you know what I see every day? I take care of people with addiction all day long, and people get better. It's a bad brain disease, but you can get better. But it's not one thing that makes you better. It's about 20 things that have to go well for you, right? So to get better, you need stable, sober living. You need a place to go where somebody isn't actively drinking or using. And as a community, that's one thing you can support. If somebody says, I want to build a sober house, don't say no as a community. Think to yourself, you know what, Holliston might be a good town for a sober house, right? You guys don't seem to be on some active heroin distribution line that I could tell, not that I know. But you know what, lots of our small towns would be great sober living communities. People need good mental health care. They need to have their ACE scores addressed. They need trauma treatment, medication-assisted treatment, whether it's methadone, buprenorphine, or naltrexone, makes a huge difference for opiate addiction. I'm a huge proponent of those things. I really believe that we got to work with people at all the needs that they have to have addressed. These are great books on addiction that I've read in the last 6 years. Has anybody read any of these books? Yeah, this is a good time to take a smartphone picture if you want to go back and look at these books later. Anybody read any of these books? Anybody read? Which one did you read, Gina? Dreamland, okay. All of these books are awesome books. Beautiful Boy is about a dad's struggle with his son who develops a terrible addiction. He's an amazing writer. David Sheff is an amazing writer, and he wrote the book Clean. The best book on trauma, if that section I spent on trauma touched you in any way, or if you thought to yourself, I work with kids on a day-to-day basis, I should know more about trauma, that book in the top middle called The Body Keeps the Score is the Bible of what it means to have a bad childhood and what it does to you long term. And that book changed my life. That book is next to my bed. My husband and I sort of take turns reading it. It made me a better doctor, and it changed the way I practice on a day-to-day basis, more than any other book I've ever read. So I think that is a great read. I have a website that my kid made for me this summer. My videos are there. My talk schedule is there. You're welcome to go there. You are welcome to take my talk and give it anywhere you want. You don't need to credit me. You could say you devised the whole thing yourself. I don't care. I want the information to get out there because the more people know, the more ahead we can get on this, right? I think we all have this potential. So this is the website, and again, I'm going to leave the screen up on the books because I think this is important, and then I'm going to hand this back to Gina. Okay. Thank you, everyone. And so we're going to do at the panel, we'll be able to do questions.
Wow, right? Oh my gosh. I knew she was amazing, but I didn't know it was going to be that amazing. I was tearing up a little bit there. Okay, so we're going to have our panelists head up now. And Katie, okay. So if you guys didn't get the handout that explains the biography of everybody that's going on the panel, I'll just give you a couple tidbits. Obviously, Dr. Ruth Potee, she is certified family medicine and addiction medicine physician at Valley Medical Group in Greenfield, Mass. As she said, she's a native of Western Mass. She's got a long list of stuff here. Medical director for the Franklin County House of Corrections, Franklin Recovery and Treatment Center, and Pioneer Valley Regional School District, as well as the chair of the Healthcare Solutions of the Opioid Task Force of Franklin County. She was also named Franklin County Doctor of the Year by Massachusetts Medical Association. So she's an amazing person. Brad Jackson, anybody, you guys all know Brad Jackson. And Dr. Potee did mention it. I thought this was interesting. The report of Dr. Jackson's Task Force on Student Stress, which published in 2016, has been a model by dozens of school districts in Massachusetts, which is something to feel good about here, right? Katie Sugarman is actually on the Holliston Drug and Alcohol Coalition, as well as she is Prevention and Outreach Program Manager for the town of Natick. She's also been involved in the town of Revere and Watertown, and she's a certified prevention specialist. We are super lucky to have her here to help us ongoing. Chief Stone is the newest chief as of April 2017. We have Officer DeGiorgio, who is our resource officer in Holliston schools, and we are very lucky that our town even has resource officers. Sergeant Thompson is a 16-year veteran of Holliston Police Department and has 8 years experience as a detective. I didn't mean to cut you guys short, but I wanted to let you guys take some questions. So Q&A does anybody have any questions for the panel? I'll bring you this. No questions. No one has any questions. All right, a question.
Oh, okay. So my question is about addiction to iPhones, smartphones. I'm just wondering if there's data available about how the brain responds to cell phones, the same, like the dopamine release and things like that, where you showed us very compelling numbers.
We are none of us were prepared for this, right? I mean, like the iPhones in the hands of the 10-year-old. I mean, I don't know who has a 6th grader who insists they must have a phone because all of their friends have phones, right? We all got blindsided by this thing. And what you just described I feel teary because I've had massive battles at my own house. And I've watched my kids who used to be voracious readers every night, chewing through books. You know, they just stare at their screens and they Snapchat and all of this stuff. It's incredibly upsetting. So I read that article in The Atlantic now 8 weeks ago, and we had this massive fight at my house, screaming fight with everybody involved, and we took the kids' phones away. And we really now restrict them. Now, I don't take them away all day, right? But they now have much more limited use, and they come into my bedroom at 9 p.m. Because guess what? Those phones are going off all night long. I mean, have you seen your kids' phones at night? Your kids are getting messages all night long, and their internet access is terrifying because what you can see on the internet is absolutely everything, things that none of us should be seeing at that age. So I have to say, as parents, we have got to control it. And what I wish is that we had the technology. So Comcast has technology, but I think you have to pay for it. Is anybody using the Comcast technology to shut down the phones? I think, are you using it? And is it successful for you? So there are ways that you can control the number of hours a day they use, even the time they use. And like we've been ready for this for a couple years. So you've got to call your provider and figure out what they have available for you to control it. And I looked at the superintendent to ask the question, are our kids being educated about the mal effect of screens on them? First of all, they're not going to believe you, right? They're not going to believe you. So I had my daughters read that Atlantic article. I had them read it. It wasn't above their heads. And whatever, they didn't talk to me for 2 days. It was awful at my house. But after 1 week, my 15-year-old came back to me. She didn't apologize. I never expect an apology. But she said to me, Mom, I want to say something to you. I'm sleeping better than I was. I'm less tired during the day. And I'm back reading a book now, and I'm really enjoying it. She acknowledged that, right? Which was amazing. So I want you to read, I want everybody to read that Atlantic article, and I really think that we need to get this Comcast app, and maybe Sprint has one and other people, and we all need to be using them. And I actually think most schools need to have some curriculum that talks about the addictive nature of these screens and how they're not good for our kids. So did you want to add anything?
Well, I do want to add something because I'll be the first to admit that schools add to this problem in many ways. We are a technology-rich school district and have embraced technology as a school district as a tool to enhance teaching and learning. So I'd be the first to admit that schools, I talked earlier about society giving mixed messages. I think I'd be foolish not to admit that schools aren't giving a mixed message as well. And I struggle with how to address that. It's very difficult to distinguish when your children are interacting with peers online for the purpose of collaborating on a homework assignment or for the purpose of talking about their recent breakup with their boyfriend or girlfriend. And I don't have a real good answer to that question. I think there is, I think we have talked some in our curriculum about the impact that phones and blue light has on sleep and how children and adults struggle after, you shouldn't be looking at your phone within an hour of when you want to go to sleep because that light stimulates you awake and gives you difficulty. But I'd be the first to admit that it's a message that not only Holliston, but I think a lot of school districts and society in general is still struggling with, because there is good uses of technology and there are bad uses of technology. And we have to continue to talk to kids about that. We have to continue as families to talk about that. For the most part, I think that phones, in many of our homes, phones are private devices that kids have that they use primarily for personal use, and They tend to use their laptops or other family devices for school use more often than not, but that is not 100% true as well. So that is a very long answer to say I acknowledge this is an issue. It's an issue that we as a society still are struggling with. And if I'd be lying to sit up here and tell you that we're any better than anybody else when trying to address the issue. That's not what you wanted to hear, is it?
Thank you.
Oh, my turn. I'm wondering what we're doing to address vaping in the high school. I know we have a problem in the restrooms. That's what my children have reported, and I'm just wondering what we're doing about it, what we can do about it.
This is not going to be a fun night, is it? Vaping is an issue at Holliston High School and at high schools across Massachusetts, and at least across Massachusetts. I work with superintendents every day, and we talk about issues that we struggle with, and this is one of them. It is a very, very difficult issue to address with the level of staffing that we have. We can't monitor every bathroom, so we try to lock bathrooms, and that is not, in a high school that's built like this, where you have 3 or 4 minutes to get between classes, that's not a good solution either. We're also trying to incorporate more movement into our students' day to improve their health and wellness. So we are encouraging students during DSB and other times to walk, to be out and about and improve their own physical health. Well, guess what? That's also causing problems on the other end of it because they have easier access to restrooms during that time and less supervision. So there are consequences to all of these well-intentioned things. I sit here before you tonight and tell you that vaping is an issue at Holliston High School, and it's an issue that we as a community need to deal with. Because we don't know what these kids are inhaling. Yes, they're inhaling it in the bathrooms at Holliston High School, but I can assure you that that is only if they are vaping in Holliston High School, they are sure as heck vaping everywhere else, and they are better supervised here than they are in the community. I'm not saying they're well supervised in our bathrooms, but they are better supervised in Holliston High School than they are after school, when they're not in an after-school program, when they're not at home. So this is an issue about opportunity and about messaging as well. And we as a community have to start talking to our kids about the fact that vaping is dangerous. And unless and until we get that message, they're not smoking cigarettes in bathrooms because they get the message that smoking is dangerous. They're vaping in bathrooms because they don't think it's harmful. That is, to me, that is one of the issues. Now, I'm not trying to avoid this. We do have to improve supervision. We have to be in the bathrooms more often, which is going to make kids very uncomfortable because they want privacy, understandably. There's a lot of anxiety in students. But we also need to recognize that the messaging they're getting from school is not strong enough, from parents is not strong enough, from the community is not strong enough, from media is not strong enough, that vaping is dangerous.
I'm wondering if we can just hear from the school resource officer on that question. I don't know if you guys know your school resource officer, but they're some of my favorite people in the school because they're the ones who really seem to know what's happening, and they're actually the ones who have the backs of the kids who are struggling the most. So, right, is that you?
Yeah,
over there?
Just like, good evening.
You may need to use the mic a little closer.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Let me scoot over here. You know, just like Dr. Jackson said, I mean, this is a problem, and you know, we have to understand the privacy of the students within the bathroom, and it's definitely a challenge for the schools and the police, and it's, you know, they're very accessible to get. They purchase them online. You know, we have 3 places in town here that purchase these devices, and it's a challenge. It's a challenge. You know, as parents, you just have to be aware of these devices at home, and a lot of times the vaporizers or e-cigarettes, they can be modified to smoke other substances, such as marijuana, cannabis oil. So as parents, if you have a son or daughter who is vaping, it's you know, and maybe it's time to maybe take a look at the vape, or, you know, inspect it. But we're doing what we can down here. So I think it really comes down to the communication with the parents, and you know, educating your son or daughter of the harm of these new challenges, these devices. So.
Can I just ask what the consequence is in the school if they are caught vaping?
Honestly, it's in the handbook. I don't recall. It's I mean, I don't recall. I'm sorry. It's similar to when it's treated as a smoking offense, yes. But, you know, and the other thing that you may not be aware, vaping doesn't have, in many cases, doesn't have an odor. So in the old days, when you would walk past the boys' room and smell the smoke wafting out of the boys' room, it didn't take a rocket science of an administrator in my high school when I was growing up to know what was going on inside that boys' room. And that caused administrators to veer into the boys' room and address that, and kind of cause that balance about privacy and not privacy. Vapes, you know, vapor doesn't give off, in many cases, some do, some don't give off a telltale odor, particularly in the hallway. Sometimes even a student can be vaping in a stall and you may not smell it in another stall. So the telltale signs are much more subtle, and so it is more difficult to police, you should excuse the expression, for that reason as well. No excuses. It's too much. There's too much going on, and we need to continue to work on that. But it is a much more challenging issue.
Sorry, could I just add one more thing to that, too? Sorry. So I'm a prevention specialist, which means that I have a little bit of training in public health, and I've gotten a certification from the state to work on this. And while enforcement is really important, and while curriculum and enforcement in school is really important, I think we also have to think seriously about why there are 3 stores in this small town where you can buy these products. And I think that we, as parents and as informed citizens, or as citizens who maybe need to inform ourselves more, because again, vaping is new to all of us, including those of us who are in the medical field, those of us who have some prevention background. And I think we may have to get a little bit more we have to inform ourselves, and we have to stand up and really talk to our health department and to our town decision makers about some of these things. Because what we know from research is, while, again, enforcement and curriculum is really important, parent perception and parent attitude about these things really make a huge impact. Even though peer influence is hugely important, kids do, at the end of the day, come back to what would mom or dad think about the decision I'm making. But also environmental factors are huge. And so if we have a high concentration of alcohol stores, alcohol retail outlets, or areas or stores where you can get e-cigarettes and vape pens, again, in a very small community of 16,000, 15,000 people. I've worked in other communities where the health department's been very aggressive and vape stores are not allowed. I work in a different Metro West community, and when I say I live in Holliston, they say, oh, do you live near that vape shop that's on 126? Or on 16? It's something that we need to be, I think, a little bit more informed about, and we need to take some action as a community, too, when it comes to some of these issues.
So thank you all for being here tonight and for your time, especially for this topic. This is the third presentation I've heard in a week, and so it has really hit home to me that our tweens need to be spoken to sooner than later. And I actually was at a conference and I texted my husband and I said, we are in for quite a ride in the next couple of years. I have a 5th grader and I don't know how to talk to him. I grew up in a different generation where it was you do as I say, you will not do drugs, you will not drink alcohol, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm asking publicly that we set up community forums with the schools, the police department, and the local pediatric offices. I go to a pediatrician's office where every year at the well visit, they print out a sheet of all the things you should be doing for your child. Make sure they wear safety belts, make sure they're in a booster if they're not this, make sure they're taking vitamins, et cetera, et cetera. This is really a big thing, and I would encourage us publicly that we start to have that conversation because I know I'm not the only one. So I just thank you again for your time on this, but let's keep talking.
I will add to that in terms of the prevention aspect of it. A lot of these things we've talked about tonight are reacting to things that have kind of already hit us. One step the police department has taken, as I'm sure many of you know, we now have a second school resource officer in the middle schools and elementary schools, which is a big initiative on our part. I work very closely with Dr. Jackson, and not to say that we've lost the kids by the time they get to high school, but a lot of kids by the time they get to freshman, sophomore year, they've set in their ways. They've already kind of made those decisions. They've already kind of chosen that path, if you will. We have an officer now assigned temporarily to like I said, the elementary, middle schools, and in just the first few months of schools, the impact that we've seen from that has been tremendous. We have kids waiting in line, leaving lunches late because they want to sit with the school resource officer and tell them about their day. So we see it from that level at the K through 2 grade, where the officer's reading stories to them, reading books to them. So I think the prevention, as you spoke to it earlier, is probably more important than the reaction to what we were kind of already in the middle of. So at least from the law enforcement police side of it, I think we've taken big steps to address that issue. I think we can only improve from it, but I think communication between parents, students, like you said, the forums, I think that's a great way to start. And that's why we have all of us here tonight, because it's obviously important to so many of us. So.
I think it's great that we're doing this tonight. I think, but the real challenge, I think, is scaring these seniors, juniors out of their mind, so they're not listening to parents, or maybe mine isn't. But I know I'm not alone. But I think, and I think I messaged you, Gina, that they need to hear it from people who've been in recovery, people who are former addicts. They need to be scared out of their freaking mind where they're headed, because by the time they're 17, they're not listening to us. And it's scary. And I think it's going to take, a tragedy for them to wake up. And it's about their peers. They're listening to their peers. And I'm shaking because it's scary. And I'm living it, and I'm here. And, Gina, we've talked. And, thank you, Chris, for being, we chat, we text, middle of the night, are our kids safe? Are they alive? And I don't know. I know 5 years ago, a woman came into the schools. Her daughter died. I think she was in Dover. And there was a seminar for the students, and then the parents came in the evening. She told her story about her daughter, who was a cheerleader. She was drunk. Everybody saw her at a football game. She drowned in a puddle. She walked away, and she drowned, and nobody Nobody spoke up. And I remember my son came home and he was totally just torn up about it. And then I went in the evening and I listened to the same thing. And it hit home. And I left that article on his bed all the time. What will happen if you drink and, do stupid things and the consequences. And I'm kind of disappointed that there aren't more people here tonight. I thought it would have been packed because I think the class of 2018, I think there's a lot of, alcohol and pot and, the vaping. And I don't know how, as a parent, to get through it. So, any one of you.
I mean, I'll jump in real quick and I'll let the doctor talk. I think if each of us leave here and tell one other person about the presentation that we saw tonight and something that we took away or one piece, then maybe that person will tell somebody else. And I think it goes back to the prevention part of it. Going back to your original question about the cell phones, I'm probably the worst person here. When I get home, the first thing I do in my capacity is I'm on my phone. And my kid sees me on my phone, and I'm mimicking that behavior. Even though he's small, he's taking that in. And I think about that, and when the doctor said, you come home and you pour that glass of wine and you have that beer, we should be the role models just as much as we are telling our kids not to do things or do things a certain way. We also need to lead by example, and I think that's important. If we sit up here and preach certain things and we say certain things, but we're not leading that or doing that the same way we're preaching it, I think we're sending mixed messages. So I think it starts with us, including myself. And if we can do that and try to get them at an earlier age and try to get them at that point, it's not an easy task. And I think you're right, we're up for a big challenge.
But I actually also will make an argument that I really think our kids are up for the challenge. And I hear your fear in your voice because I have lots of loved people in my life who are struggling every day, and I fear for their lives. The scared straight message works for some kids, but the studies will say it doesn't work for most kids. And Chris Herron does a great job of coming to schools and telling his story. I think he does a remarkable, and he was here last year is what I was just told. I think he tells a really good story of that people can get better, and boy, you can go down that rabbit hole fast. I am a big believer in empowering our kids to be active bystanders, and one of the reasons I think your son came home scared from that presentation was he was imagining himself, what could he have done to change the outcome from that young woman? I think our kids are actually all superheroes, and I think the more we charge our kids with the ability to change a life, the better capacity they have to do it. So when I launched my kid off to college, he knew about his risk for addiction, right? But what did I know? I knew he was going to drink and probably, I guess, he might use marijuana, even though he knew I'd be miserable about it. He's going off to college, not my problem, it's his. This kid went off to college not because he's a perfect boy at all, but I'll say that he went off and he was trained in first aid and he knew CPR and he knew how to use Narcan. He knew that, right? Because all of our kids can do that. He was also trained as an active bystander by his school, which means those are the kids whose job it is to look around and stop bullying and make sure that girls aren't getting hauled up the back stairs of the frat party, and make sure that your buddy who is hanging all over that young person, who's too inebriated really to do that, maybe he needs to be evacuated from that problem. A lot of our kids have the capacity to help protect others. And part of I know what it feels like to want to be a superhero, and a lot of our kids want that too. Knowing that you can go to your first frat party and actually be the one that's not really drinking, and that your job is to look around at all of these freshmen who are about to get hammered and drop down blackout drunk, and maybe you can prevent a sexual assault. You think your kid isn't capable of that? They are capable of that. They just need to be told that. So my kid's first frat party, he spent that night in the emergency room, having hauled in one of 5 kids in that year that he spent the night with in the emergency room who were blackout drunk, who are not safe. And his decision tree is like, do I call 911 or do I call Uber? I'm like, don't ever call Uber to bring the kid who's blackout drunk to the ER, which is what he normally does. But my point is that a lot of our kids have that capacity. And do you guys do active bystander training here? I don't know. It's a concept that we use in Western Mass, but it's about intervening when people are in trouble, even if it puts you in harm's way, even if it makes you stand out as a social pariah. It's always better to protect other people. I really think our kids can do that, and you've got to have this conversation with them going off to college, because I don't know who has a kid in college, but man, they're smoking a lot of weed and drinking a lot of alcohol in college. It's very distressing for those of you who are writing that check to walk in on a Tuesday morning and smell a lot of pot in the dorms. Anybody else have that experience? Right? It's not so fun.
while she moves the microphone, I just want to suggest one thing. Don't give up. Our kids are listening to us more than we think. They want our approval more than we think. They want our love more than we think, even when they push us away. They want boundaries more than we think. They want to be loved, and they want to be helped. They really, really do. The one thing that I purposely do is I talk about high school students, and I use the word children, because high school students are children, developmentally. We always call them young adults. They're not young adults. They're children in big bodies. And they want the same thing. They push us away, but they want the same things that they did when they were 7 and when they were 8. Maybe not the same way, maybe not in the same frequency, maybe not publicly, but they still want it. And so don't give up. They really want a relationship with you. They really want to be loved by you, guided by you, supported by you, and provided some boundaries. That's my experience, for what it's worth, as an educator watching. Trust me, I'm by far not a perfect parent.
I just want to make a quick comment. I'm so happy to hear some of the real-life stories here tonight, and I feel like we're just beginning to scratch the surface of what the pulse is in Holliston. I worry about the data that we share and we open up with that says, look how great we're doing in Holliston, and we use the data that the students use to self-report. And I just wondered if there was anybody up on the panel that might be able to sort of speak to how accurate is that when you ask a 15-year-old. I just wonder if there are other ways. I don't mean to question the data as much to say, are there other ways to really begin to shine a light on what's happening in our community, and as you said, Dr. Jackson, all over in society? That's really all I wanted to say.
So the survey that Dr. Jackson was referring to is actually considered a very reliable survey. I think you were referencing the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. It's the Metro West Adolescent Health Survey is the local version that's applied regionally, and it is this is a survey that has been validated multiple times over. Are there kids who lie on it? Absolutely, but there are ways of screening out some of those questions that are clearly in contradiction. So there will be a question early in the survey that might ask you, have you ever used a tobacco product in your life? And if you say no, but then further down you've Christmas treed the whole thing, and further down you say yes to something else, and the answers are contradictory, your survey has now been completely screened out. So that doesn't mean that there aren't people who underreport or overreport, but typically it happens on a similar scale from year to year. So it's not like 90% of a class lies one year and then only 20% lies the next year. It's usually kind of consistent, so we can pull some reliable assumptions, some educated assumptions from it. Does that mean that we shouldn't look at multiple data sources? Absolutely. You need to talk to young people directly. You need to talk to parents directly. Focus groups, key stakeholder interviews. Those are all ways that we then kind of put together a clearer picture. That's actually the type of stuff that HDAAC is trying to do. If there are parents or community members who really want to get involved in this work, communities that have coalitions, that's what HDAAC is, coalitions of multiple sectors of the community, parents, law enforcement, schools, fire departments, medical personnel, behavioral health specialists, businesses. Yes, even businesses have a stake in this issue, because you know what? Addiction actually really negatively impacts the employability of people and how well we can actually make a buck in this state. If we're not actually showing up to work, it impacts businesses. Everybody has a role to play in this, and communities that have coalitions like HDAAC actually do show lower rates of substance use. The challenge that a community and a coalition like HDAAC has is that we're not funded. We don't have a federal grant or anything, and there are some communities that have funded coalitions that are actually mobilizing to do these types of educational events multiple times a year, that are mobilizing communications to actually say, hey, did you hear there's going to be a vote at town meeting about recreational marijuana? We need people to show up. I mean, when we're relying completely on a volunteer base and coming together once or twice a year in these types of forums, and a few dozen people show up when we should have a packed auditorium, like what was said before, that's where we don't make the progress as quickly as we'd all like to see. But if anybody wants to get involved in HDAAC, Gina back there is somebody to talk to, myself here, anybody here in the front row. We need more people at the table to really move some of this forward. So, and I commend all of you for being here tonight, because it starts with at least some of us. And the parents who were talking about talking to other parents, that's one of the most valuable things you can do. We need each other as allies. My kids are still at the starting line. They're Placentino. I still have that tough road ahead of me that a lot of you are already living. But it takes parents actually talking to each other and working together to make a real difference in this. And your input you actually have a lot of impact on your own kids' friends too. So that whole concept of it takes a village. If so-and-so doesn't feel, if Johnny doesn't feel comfortable talking to mom and dad at home, but they go to Jimmy's house and they know Jimmy's mom is always really honest or will really listen, that has a really positive impact. So we all have the power to impact our kids' friends in really positive ways. So, off my soapbox, sorry.
Hi there. I'd like to thank you guys all for coming and doing all this for us. It's great. I had a sort of a question or a suggestion maybe. I'm on the fire department and I do the Jaws of Life calls, and a lot of times we'd have mock accidents before like prom time to see drinking and driving and what effects it could be on you. What if we would be able to do like a drug overdose mock in the school, have like all the kids come in the auditorium and maybe do some sort of a thing that would show the consequences of possibly doing drugs, even if it was pot or whatever, and see how it affects everybody.
Or what a drug overdose looks like what the precursor behavior to that looks like, or the drunk frat party, what that behavior looks like. We have a great drama department.
Yeah, sometimes when the kids see it, sometimes when the kids see it, it means more than just saying it. They all think they're superheroes and they're indestructible, but when you see it in front of you, sometimes that would help.
Thank you. That's a good suggestion. We do some issues around, particularly around driving while impaired. We have the simulation for our students that they take to try to see what it's like to drive a go-kart when they're impaired. And we bring those in from time to time. They're state available resources like that, and that has also been expanded through. I don't remember I forget the organization that does it, but they also have a driving while impaired on marijuana glasses. You actually put on glasses and it kind of impacts your perception, and students get that feeling of what it's like to drive while impaired, that you hope gives them the message that so they don't end up being a call of yours. So but using linking that to drama programs and those types of things, there are some that do that, but I don't know. I'll have to look for that. I don't know. It's a great idea.
Sorry, could I just add to that? What Dr. Potee said before is really true, that scare tactics, as they're called, haven't been shown to be effective, generally speaking, across the population. I was not a risk-taking young person. I totally acknowledge that. So for me, it had huge impact, because I was terrified at the thought of wrapping my tree around a vehicle my vehicle around a tree. Tree around a vehicle would be really tough. So for me, that would have a lot of impact, but it wouldn't necessarily for one of my siblings kids who has a history of substance use issues, for him, it was an opportunity to actually push the risk a little bit further. So what I would say, though, is that the idea of bringing something through the drama department still has a lot of value if it's coupled with less of the drama and more on the educational piece. What could you do? What's some empowering information that everybody in this auditorium could benefit from, so that if you ever do witness an overdose, you don't freeze in the fear that you associate with what you saw in the auditorium when you were in that assembly, but, oh, I know that there were 3 steps I'm supposed to do. What do I do? Okay, call 911, see if anybody has Narcan, and start rescue breathing. So, trying to arm people with that information in a way that has impact makes a lot of sense.
Chris Herron, but
anyway, I'm finding that the sort of the presentation was back from a physiological, very data-oriented sort of angle is very, very different than anything I've seen, and very compelling and interesting. So.
It's okay. Okay, sorry. I'm just finding that it's a different tack to present this information from a very sort of medical, physiological data perspective. And it's been interesting that several times during your presentation, Dr. Potee, that you said this is not with any judgment, it's just delivering the facts. And I guess I'm wondering if we've ever presented this type of data in this type of format to the students, where it's just fact-oriented. And I think it would be beneficial and maybe also sort of a different delivery than they've seen. And I'm wondering if there's any plan to incorporate this type of, some of this information into the health classes or into some sort of a session for the students.
Well, I'm going to, first of all, I think I'd also like to know if you do this for students, because I was thinking the exact same thing. I sometimes, as good as the Chris Herron type of presentations are, I think that they miss some. And this was actually the second presentation like this that I've seen in a week. I saw when the school committees saw one down at their conference this past Friday. And so it kind of struck me the same way, that, wow, this is a really logical, thoughtful way to kind of allow kids to come to their own conclusion that, wow, this is really a pretty stupid thing I'm thinking about. And that's, do you do this type of work for, do you meet with students? Do you do this presentation to kids?
So I have like 6 jobs right now, if you heard my resume. So I do actually come to high schools and talk to kids during the day. I do it not frequently because I really have lots of jobs, but you can go to my website and ask. I already said to Sarah as we drove in here, I was like, Sarah, I've got my talk to the kids that you could come back to your high school and deliver, and I'll train you how to do it. Because the truth is, I'm trying to get other people to do this stuff, right? I'm not the only speaker out there. There's lots of great speakers out there. I have a lot of experience. I agree with that. Has anybody in this room ever stood in front of 1,000 teenagers? It's terrifying, right? But I've done it actually a lot. I did it at Natick. I did it in Medfield recently, right? Is Medfield right next door? Yeah, I was at Medfield. You could call the superintendent. And it was good. In fact, Medfield's alcohol consumption rates are actually shockingly high. Don't tell them I said that to you. But I told that to the kids. We actually had a really good discussion about it. It's a place where there's a lot of normalized behavior amongst adults drinking in public and at tailgating at football parties, and where they have beer fridges or alcohol fridges in every in every garage that appear to be wide open to any neighbor kid who wants to use it. Like that, for me, is a community that is really advocating for heavy alcohol consumption. So we had a really good discussion in a chock-a-block full room of students about what that looks like. So I am a believer that when you educate kids, they make better decisions. When you scare kids, there's the group of us who get scared, and then there's the group of the rest of us who are like, I'm in further. That sounds awesome, right? So, so yeah, the answer is yes, but there's other people who can give this talk locally, and I have the slide deck ready to go that I'll share with anybody. And if the health teachers, if they want to get boned up on the stuff, they can go watch the videos. They can steal the slide deck. This is not rocket science. Use the data that's there. Don't recreate the wheel, and just teach it. The kids want to know the stuff. They deserve to know how their brains develop. Our teenagers deserve to know that stuff. They have amazing brains. We should celebrate them.
Okay, I think we've probably got time for one more question, and I know the lady over here has been waiting for a while, the lady with long blonde hair. Have you still got a question? Okay, good. So we'll make this our last question. I'm sorry to keep you longer, but I know the discussion is really useful, so we'll just take this last one.
Is it on? Hi. I just want to commend you for talking openly about addiction. My husband is a family physician. He also does addiction medicine. But I wanted to just share with you, we moved here 6 years ago. He applied for a position on the Cape, and they did not want to do addiction medicine. He applied for a position in Concord, New Hampshire. They did not want to do addiction medicine. So I think it's very telling that now we can talk openly. He does practice addiction medicine, and he can talk openly about it. But I also wanted to share, too, that some of the biggest things that our patients will say, and we see people who are 16, we see people who are 62, but one of their biggest things is that don't judge, and it's hard to talk openly about what's happening. So I commend you for going around and talking, and the more that we talk about it, the more help people can get, and it's everywhere. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I just want to remind everybody that this was also streamed live and broadcast as well, so hopefully we have reached more people than we've seen in the room, as well as having a great audience participation. I'd like to thank all of our panellists for being here this evening. We've enjoyed everybody's contribution. And again, to thank all of you for coming out this evening. And please share the news, and I will share the presentation and follow up on where the full broadcast can be viewed again at a later date. So thank you.
Nice job, Dan.
Awesome. Holy smokes, she's organized.